Hi, you are watching Rituals of Dread.
Today, we will open archives that were never meant for outside eyes. Letters, diaries, official reports, all weaving into a story that chills you, even if you're watching this by the fireplace. In the archives of the St. John's Mission Station on the coast of Hudson Bay lies a case officially listed under the number 1874/MC12. Inside are ink-covered sheets, letters and reports written in the trembling hand of Father Isaac Mercers, an Anglican priest and scholar who lived among the Inuit tribes for almost 20 years. Most missionary records from that era are tedious accounts of flower deliveries, failed attempts to instill Christian morals in walrus hunters, and tragic measles epidemics. But the MC12 case is different. It begins with words that read as strangely today as they did 150 years ago. In January 1874, a child arrived in our community with eyes the color of northern ice. She spoke little, but listened to everything, and Lord, I swear she heard more than human ears can hear. Her name was Marianna Crowell, and even then I felt she was not one of us. The winter of 1874 was especially cruel. Frost gripped the bay so firmly that even the Inuit, accustomed to the cold, preferred not to leave the village. Few people came to the mission, only the occasional trader from the Hudson's Bay Company post brought news from the south. On one such day, January 11th, 2 Inuit men arrived at the mission with a dog sled, and between them, a tiny girl of about 12, wrapped in a parka far too large for her. She looked emaciated, her skin paler than snow, her hair the color of scorched straw, her eyes that same cold, pale blue shade only seen in icebergs on overcast days. Father Isaac wrote in his journal, "The men brought her from the coast, saying they found her after a storm in a half-sunken kayak. The boat was smashed, but the girl did not have a scratch. They did not know her name. She gave it herself. Marianne, in English, with an accent I cannot place in any province. All she had with her was a small leather satchel containing a wooden comb, a brass thimble, and a Bible, on the first page of which, in neat handwriting, was inscribed, 'Marianna Crowell, Halifax, N.S., 1871. There were no spare beds at the mission, so Marianne was housed in a tiny room next to the kitchen. Women from the settlement brought her warm furs, but as Father Isaac noted, the girl seemed almost impervious to the cold. He wrote in his journal, "She sleeps lightly, without blankets, as if frost is no enemy to her. Sometimes I wake in the night. She stands at the window, barefoot, staring at the bay, for hours." At first, Marianne spoke little, but she helped where she could, tidying the chapel, carrying water, even teaching the younger children the alphabet. But people at the mission began to notice strange things. The sled dogs growled when she passed, ears laid flat. Birds, on the other hand, often landed on her shoulder or straight into her hands. Children who played with her later complained of strange dreams in which they fell through ice or walked through an endless tunnel of snow. The first incident. 2 weeks after her arrival, an accident occurred by the bay. One of the local fishermen, Peter Olson, went out to check his nets and did not return. When the men found him, he was sitting on the ice, staring into nothing, unresponsive to their shouts. The ice around him was solid, the nets were empty, and there was no one nearby. Later, when Peter recovered, he said he had seen a small figure in white standing by an ice hole. He called out to her, and she supposedly turned to him with Marianne's face. Then, he said, "I felt a strong wind and fell asleep." Father Isaac noted in his report, "It is madness. That day, Marianne was in the mission all morning in view of 3 witnesses. But I saw something in her eyes for the first time, not fear, not joy, but knowing." From then on, Father Isaac began recording her every word and action. He noticed she asked questions far beyond her years, about death, about how long a person can survive without food or water, about why some bodies do not decay after death. When he asked her why she wanted to know these things, Marianne calmly replied, "Sometimes God gives people trials. You must be ready." But he doubted this was a child's religious fear. It sounded like a plan. In March, the bay was struck by the fiercest storm in a decade. That evening, as the wind drove the snow sideways, Father Isaac heard someone open the mission door. Marianne was gone from her room. He and 2 men went out into the blizzard to search for her. They found her standing at the very edge of a lead, just steps from the raging water. The waves leapt a yard from her. The wind should have knocked her down, but she stood motionless, staring into the darkness. When they approached her, she said quietly, "He's calling me, but it's not time yet." The next day, the bay's ice was littered with dead gulls, though no one in the village hunted them. The dogs refused to go outside. And in Marianne's room, Father Isaac found a damp but intact scrap of a letter in English. It read, "If anything happens on the way, guard her as your own blood. She is special. She knows things we do not, and she must not fall into the hands of—" The rest was torn away. Notes of the priest. At the end of his first notebook of reports, Father Isaac wrote, "The girl clearly survived a shipwreck or some disaster, but there is something in her presence that troubles me more than any storm. People are starting to have strange dreams. Animals either shun her or cling to her. She behaves reservedly, but I increasingly suspect that this reserve is not childish nyness, but cold calculation." By April 1874, the ice in the bay began to crack, and St. John's Mission came to life again. Men repaired kayaks, women prepared nets, children ran across the crusted snow until sunset. Only Father Isaac continued his observations of Marianne, though many no longer considered her an outsider. She helped the women, cared for the elderly, and knew dozens of songs in Inuit language. But it was during this period that the events began which would later lead MC-12 to be called the Disappearance Diary. The death of Elias Hansen. On April 21st, a boy named Nuka ran to the mission shouting that he had found a sleeping man at the river mouth. It was Elias Hansen, an old hunter of Danish origin who had lived among the Inuit for over 30 years. They found him kneeling at the very edge of the ice, face turned towards the water, eyes open but pupils dilated as in a man dead in darkness. On his neck was a thin red mark, as if from a rope, but no rope was found nearby. There was no coroner in the mission, and Father Isaac only wrote, "Death was quick, not the usual signs of strangulation. The ice beneath him was solid. He had not fallen in, and, strangely, in the snow beside the body were prints of small boots, clearly a child's. The tracks led towards the village and vanished in the slush. Only one person in the village wore such boots: Marianna." The interrogation. Father Isaac didn't want to believe the obvious, but he decided to speak to the girl immediately. "Where were you this morning?" he asked her when they were alone in the kitchen. "Walking," she replied, "watching the ice crack." "Did you see Hansen?" "Yes, he was standing and listening to how the water sings." "And then?" "Then he stopped listening." She said it without emotion, looking him straight in the eye.
A few days later, rumors began to spread in the village that Marianna had brought death. Old Agnes, respected for her knowledge of ancient lore, declared that the girl was a snow siren, a being that had come from the sea to take souls. Father Isaac tried to persuade people that this was mere superstition, but inwardly he began to waver. His journal entries from that period grew increasingly uneasy. "She sits by the window at night, Sometimes I wake and see the moon falling on her face, and it seems not like a child's, as though she were an old woman playing the role of a girl. The disappearance of Tommy Arcto. At the end of May, Tommy Arcto, the 10-year-old son of a hunter, went missing. He was last seen playing near an old ice sled at the river mouth. That day, Marianna was there too. 2 teenagers said so, but added that she had been just standing and watching. Tommy's body was found 2 days later, 3 kilometers downstream, with no visible injuries. In his hand was clutched a piece of blue parka cloth, the same shade as Marianna's. A journal entry. On June 1st, 1874, Father Isaac made his longest entry. Today I saw her gaze, not the gaze of a child, nor even of an adult, rather the way those look who study us as if we are insects under glass. I asked her if she felt sorry about Tommy. She said, "Why feel sorry? He went to the place where we'll all go, only earlier." I remembered how she stood by the ice sled during the storm, just like that, motionless, as if listening to something unavailable to others. I am beginning to fear that this something is not from the world of the living. The trading post intervenes. By early June, word of the rumors had reached the Hudson's Bay Company post. Trader John Macready, a pragmatic Scot, arrived at the mission to put an end to the panic. He suggested taking Marianna to Churchill, where there was a school for orphans, and where she wouldn't be in the public eye.
When Father Isaac told her this, she only shrugged. "They think they can teach me something new there, but it's I who will teach them." The night before departure. That night before the planned trip, Macready heard footsteps near his post. Going outside, he saw Marianna in her thin parka. She was standing at the pier, looking at a kayak tied to the piles. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Seeing if it can make it to the other shore." She nodded toward the black expanse of the bay. "Sometimes people think they're paddling themselves, but in reality, something else is carrying them." The next day, Macready didn't wake up. They found him in bed, a look of terror frozen on his face and his eyes wide open. The doctor who examined the body said it looked like a sudden heart attack, but Father Isaac noted that the floor beside the bed was wet, as though someone had stood there dripping water. After Macready's death, the people split. Some demanded the girl be sent to Churchill immediately. Others wanted her cast out into the tundra. Let the sea take her. Father Isaac insisted on the first option, but knew they could not delay. He set the departure for the next day with good weather. The morning before departure. In the morning, he went to the bay to make sure the kayak was ready. Marianna was already there. "Do you really think you can leave?" he asked. "I'm not leaving." She turned, and her eyes gleamed. "I'm just going where they don't know me yet."
"And what will you do there? The same as here. Watch, listen." Her calmness was more frightening than any threat. The last entry in the mission. "I feel we are not rid of the danger, only sending it further. I have no proof, but I have the conviction that something lives inside this girl that does not belong to our time and perhaps not to our world. People will die again, and I fear someone in Churchill will start keeping records like mine." The departure was set for the morning of June 15th, 1874. The day was clear, a rare occurrence for these parts. The bay lay in a smooth, still-like calm, which in itself seemed suspicious. Usually, even in still weather, a light swell ran through the inlet. The kayak was to be helmed by an experienced rower named Patrick O'Connell, an Irishman working at the post. Another man, a young Inuit named Kiviok, was assigned to help on the journey. The trip to Churchill was to take 2 days, with an overnight stop at a fishing camp on the Selkirk Peninsula. Father Isaac came to the pier to say goodbye. He handed Patrick a letter for the head of the school in Churchill and quietly said, "Don't leave her alone, not for a minute." Patrick smirked. "Sir, she's just a child. What could she do?" Father Isaac didn't answer. The first few hours went smoothly. Marianna sat at the bow, staring at the horizon. She didn't speak, didn't sing as children usually do on the trip, didn't ask questions. Now and then she dipped her hand into the icy water, trailing her fingers as if testing its temperature. Kiviok later said, once in Churchill, that at one point he heard her whispering, but not in English, nor in the Inuit language. The words were drawn out with dull, rumbling sounds like the noise of ice cracking beneath one's feet. By evening, they reached Selkirk's shore. The place was deserted, with only an old fisherman's hut standing on a coastal rock. Patrick lit a fire, and Kiviok unpacked dried fish. Marianna ate almost nothing. She sat a little apart, looking into the darkening water. At one point, Patrick came over to her. "It's cold, come to the fire." She replied, "It's warmer here, you just don't feel it." Patrick shrugged and left. That night, he woke to the sound of splashing. Thinking it was Kiviok, he looked out, but saw Marianna standing knee-deep in the sea. She was motionless, and around her in the moonlight circled black shapes like seals, but they moved too fast and in perfect unison. "What are you doing?" he shouted. She turned, and Patrick later swore her eyes were as black as the water itself. The next day, Kiviok did not wake. He lay like Macready, no signs of struggle, eyes open. His face was calm, but there was salt on his lips, as if he had swallowed seawater. Patrick was shaken, but decided to continue the journey. He did not dare bring the girl back to the mission.
"He's gone," Marianna said as they pushed away from the shore. "I didn't touch him. I only showed him the way." By the evening of the second day, they entered the mouth of the Churchill River. The town greeted them with the noise of the docks and the smell of smoked fish. Patrick handed the girl over to the headmistress of the school, a stern woman named Mrs. Bland. In his letter, Father Isaac had asked that she be kept under close watch, especially at night. Mrs. Bland, after reading it, merely sighed, "We've had worse children here before." At the school, Marianna quickly stood out. She was polite, completed her assignments, but the children, they began to complain. One girl said that in her dreams she saw herself walking on the ice and falling through, with Marianna standing nearby, watching. A boy from the senior class insisted he had heard her voice in his head while he slept. At first, Mrs. Bland dismissed it all as imagination, but a week later, the first accident occurred in the classroom. 12-year-old Henry Moore fell from the stairs, breaking his neck. He was found at the foot of the landing with his arithmetic book neatly placed beside him. No one saw the moment of the fall, but Henry's friend later said that just seconds before the tragedy, she had seen Marianna standing at the top of the stairs, whispering something. When asked what Marianna had said, the girl replied, "I didn't hear words, only wind." After Henry's death, Mrs. Bland began watching Marianna herself. She noticed the girl hardly slept. At night, she sat at the window, staring at the river. Sometimes she left the dormitory and returned before dawn, but no tracks were ever found on the floor or in the snow. "I don't think she's a child," Bland admitted in the letter to Father Isaac. "Not in the sense of being older, in the sense that inside there is something else." In July, a strong thunderstorm swept over Churchill. Lightning struck the river, and one fisherman swore he saw the silhouette of a girl walking across the surface as if it were solid ground. The next morning, one of the school teachers failed to appear for class. He was found in his room, dead, with his face twisted in terror. In his diary, the last entry read, "She was standing by my bed. I knew I wasn't asleep. Eyes like ice. She said, 'Your turn soon.'" When word of the teacher's death reached the mission, Father Isaac wrote to Churchill, "Do not try to reform her. This is not a flaw of character, it is nature, and that nature is alien to us. If you wish to save the others, you must—" The letter breaks off at these words. The envelope that arrived in Churchill was empty.
By mid-August 1874, Churchill was in a state that newspapers would later call the Summer of Quiet Fear. The deaths, which had begun almost immediately after Marianna Crowell's arrival, were no longer seen as a string of accidents. Among the townsfolk, usually given to restraint, a wary silence spread. People went out less, fishermen delayed putting to sea, and women kept their children away from the school where the girl lived. In the 2 months since her arrival, 5 people had died, 3 adults and 2 children. Each case had a plausible outward explanation: a fall from the stairs, a heart attack, a mishap on the river, a sudden cold leading to pneumonia. But too much in these stories defied the ordinary. Deaths happened quietly, without struggle, without noise, and almost always someone had seen Marianna nearby. The headmistress, Mrs. Bland, began keeping her own journal of observations, realizing that spoken accounts quickly became distorted by rumor. Her surviving notes in the town archive are a series of precise, almost dry descriptions in which the growing pressure of fear is still palpable. She recorded that the girl never seemed tired, even after long school days, that her skin was always cool to the touch and her breathing steady and deep, like that of someone asleep, even when she was clearly awake, that she could sit motionless at the window for hours without shifting or blinking, as if waiting for something far away. Another recurring theme was animals. Cats seemed to hide at her approach. Dogs growled and tried to avoid her. Birds, on the other hand, landed on her hands but remained silent, as though their voices were of no use to her. In mid-August, the town council, alarmed by the chain of deaths, made an unofficial decision. Marianna would be kept under constant watch. 2 volunteer fishermen were assigned to take shifts of 12 hours each, noting her every movement and intervening if necessary. The surveillance lasted only 4 days. The first fisherman, an old veteran of whaling voyages, reported that during the day Marianna behaved like an ordinary pupil, though she avoided playing with the other children. But the night shifts were far more disturbing. On the second night, the watcher saw her leave the school building around 3 in the morning and head for the river. The moon lit the water, and in its glow he could see the girl standing at the very edge of the pier, leaning forward as if listening to the depths. He approached, but before he could call out, she lifted her head and looked straight at him, and in his words, at that moment he felt a sudden chill, as if he were under the ice. The next day he refused to continue, saying, "I can't keep looking where she looks."
At the end of August, a 7-year-old pupil, a quiet girl from a dock worker's family, died. She had not complained of illness, was cheerful in the evening, but was found dead in bed the next morning. A look of surprise was frozen on her face, and on her neck was a faint mark, as if from the touch of an icy hand. Marianna came to class that day as usual. Her hands were dry and warm, which for some reason reassured Mrs. Bland. But in her notes she remarked that the girl had spent the whole morning quietly humming a melody like a sailor's song, with words repeating in an unfamiliar language. After the child's death, panic took hold in the town. For the first time, people spoke openly about sending Marianna back to St. John's Mission, or even farther south to Winnipeg. But the railway had not yet reached the bay, and ships called rarely, with the next voyage expected only in a month. The temporary solution was isolation. She was moved to a small room in a stone outbuilding by the school, formerly used for storing teaching materials. The room had only one window facing the courtyard and a single door locked with a bolt. Food was brought twice a day, and contact was kept to a minimum. The first 3 days of isolation passed quietly. Marianna ate, slept, and answered questions briefly, without resistance. But on the 4th night, as Mrs. Bland recorded, occurred what would later be called the courtyard incident. Around midnight, the night watchman heard a noise outside the outbuilding's window. Looking out, he saw Marianna standing in the middle of the yard, though her door was still locked and sealed. She was barefoot, gazing at the sky. The moon was behind clouds, but around her, within a few steps, the snow glittered as if covered in a thin layer of ice. When the watchman went into the yard, she turned toward him. Not a word was spoken, but he later said he felt compelled to return inside. He obeyed the feeling, and only in the morning, checking the outbuilding door, found the bolt still in place. In early September, Mrs. Bland made her last journal entry before it abruptly ended. This morning, I saw her at the window of the outbuilding. She was smiling, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. And suddenly, it was clear to me. We are not keeping her here. We are keeping ourselves near her. Everything else is an illusion. This entry is dated September 3rd, 1874. The next day, the outbuilding was empty. The boat was shut, the window intact. No signs of escape were found. After Marianna's disappearance, the town felt a strange relief, but it was fragile. No one knew if she had gone far or merely shifted to somewhere she could not yet be seen. The deaths ceased, but throughout the autumn, residents reported dreams of a familiar figure standing on the shore and a whisper inviting them to look beyond the horizon.
In August of that same year, a shipment of furs arrived in Fort Severn, brought in by a group of hunters. Among them was a man named Lawrence Keene, who had lost his brother during the journey. He told how one night they camped by the Hayes River, and in the fog he saw his brother rise, as if in his sleep, and walk toward the water. Lawrence tried to stop him, but on the opposite bank he saw the figure of a barefoot girl standing on the stones. His brother stepped into the river and vanished beneath the surface. The body was found only 3 days later, several kilometers downstream. An archival note on Anna Marlowe. The records of Fort Severn contain an entry made by the local catechist. A girl named Anna Marlowe arrived in the winter of 1876, stayed at the school until the end of April, behaved calmly but avoided holidays and hymns, often asked for permission to sit alone by the river.
After the spring flood, she disappeared without a trace. Her footprints on the shore ended right at the water's edge. Several years later, in 1881, at a Halifax tavern called the Old Anchor, a whaler told a story later recorded in the local newspaper. According to him, during a voyage in the Greenland Sea, they found a young woman drifting on an ice floe, fair-haired, with eyes the color of ice. She was dressed in a fur parka, but beneath it wore a thin dress entirely unsuited for Arctic conditions. The woman called herself Mary Kay, spoke little, but in 3 days aboard had befriended the ship's boy. On the 4th day, he was found overboard, drowned in calm water. The woman vanished that same night. On the deck near the rail were only wet footprints of bare feet. In the Copenhagen police archives for 1890, there is a mention of a certain Englishwoman with northern features, arrested for vagrancy. She refused to give her real name, but spoke perfect English with a faint coastal accent. After 3 days in the cell, she disappeared, though the locks were intact, and the guards at their posts swore no one left. The police officer who recorded her description noted, "An unusual gaze. It feels as if she is studying you, not listening."